Hello and welcome to another Legions Imperialis video. This time I was doing some calculations on the Kratos Heavy Tank and had some information that I wanted to share. This is going to be a deep dive into the Kratos Heavy Tank Squadron. I also wanted to include my top 3 builds that I've been reviewing and seeing. As always, all images found in this presentation are copyrighted Games Workshop. I'm simply using them under fair use doctrine. Without further ado, the Kratos Heavy Tank. Who doesn't want to field such a large tank as tiny as this? It is cool. For the most part, it shines as a medium-ranged weapons platform. Also, it's one of the few vehicles with 2 hit points. It does have a scale of 2, meaning that in game turns, it's the same size as a Rhino. This is extremely important if your opponent ever gets infantry or even walkers into base contact with it. It is not without faults, however. It does have vulnerabilities, notably close combat, as well as air support. While it can deal with some of the close combat situations while they're coming in, it definitely does not want to be in base contact with an opponent during those fights. Similarly, against the air support options, it tends to be outgunned, as it cannot deal with those air support, while the air support are really good at dealing with it. The way I wanted to do this was evaluating each of the weapon slots and then finding out some of the conglomerated information based on this. So the Kratos Battle Cannon is the first option, and this has multiple ranges. It has a 20-inch range version and a 10-inch range shot. It is very versatile at the 20-inch range. It does have that 2 dice. It doesn't have any keywords, meaning it's just as good against infantry. It's okay against armor, things like that. However, when you look at the 10-inch range version, it does gain the anti-tank and armor bane profiles. So it is slightly less usable. So your opponent might be trying to get into close quarters with this thing or close the range gap, things like that. So it's better used at that range bracket. Of note, it does gain the AP and the armor bane. However, the armor bane is a little deceiving in this case, because even at targets with a 3+ save, armor bane has such a low return because you're either automatically wounding the target or rerolling only a 1/6 save. And that 10-inch range means you're only getting 1 die. So there's actually very little difference between shooting it at 20 inches and 10 inches against armored targets. However, it's significantly worse against infantry within those 10 inches. So again, this is your long-range gun. The Melta blast gun. This is a short-range version at only 8 inches. It does leave you vulnerable to close assaults. It has the same problem with that inefficient armor bane keyword. Wounds from traits, you're actually only gaining 0.07 wounds based on the armor bane. Again, rerolling that 1/6 save if they already have a 2+ save on the vehicle. However, this does have the bunker buster keyword, which is good for collapsing structures. I'll come back to that a little bit when I evaluate one of the builds that I liked, but it is one of the few weapons that can actually do that in the game at range. The Coaxial Autocannon. This is a medium-range gun. It must be used with the same target as the main gun. However, that's kind of a drawback when you think about it. At 16 inches, you're either losing some of the range for your battle cannon or outranging your Melta blast gun. One of the ways to think about this is a contraindication, where either you're using the battle cannon and then you're losing the AP against armored targets and losing some of that range, or if you're using this with the battle cannon at infantry, you're kind of firing inefficiently with it. Its best option is used against walkers. One of the nice things is if you're using that blast gun and maybe you're in your first turn or something, you do have that extra range because you can shoot this in kind of a versatile manner before you close the gap and get up close to use that Melta blast gun with the inches. The hull options, there are 3 of them, the heavy bolter, autocannon, and las cannons. You do get to pick 2, which is a huge benefit. This is where a lot of your firepower actually comes from, is the volume of dice that you can get from this. The first option is going to be your point defense heavy bolters, and while their ranged offensive rating is significantly lower than the other options, they do provide a defensive capability or a preemptive offensive capability if you're firing them during the move phase. This helps you cover one of your vulnerabilities that we discussed earlier, which is infantry wanting to get up close. The autocannons are going to be your versatile option. These work pretty much just as well versus armor as the las cannons. They have slightly less range, however. And then the las cannons are your good ranged anti-tank options at 22 inches. The nice thing about both the autocannon and las cannon is they do have that accurate trait. The autocannon gets your 2 dice that you get to reroll, so you kind of get a little bit more value out of that from the additional hits from those traits. Moving on to the Sponson weapons, there's the heavy bolter and the las cannon. You can't actually take the autocannon here, which actually would be kind of nice, just as far as a game perspective, to load it out with 3 autocannons, or which is going to be one of the builds that I talk about later, the triple las cannon build, because that way you don't have any inefficiencies with different range bands and things like that. Again, the point defense heavy bolters to cover your weaknesses there. The las cannon in this case is your versatile option. It is okay against flyers, but it does much better against vehicles because it can actually damage them. And the las cannon are only 23% less effective against infantry. They have better range and can actually damage the armored targets. In this case, I would say you should rarely ever take the Sponson heavy bolters. They just don't perform well. And here we have a review of all the different variants that are capable, whether or not you start with the battle cannon or the Melta, blast gun, and things like that, and to kind of give you an overview of where the variations are in the firepower versus armor versus infantry, how good they are per wound, things like that. So the first thing to note is the battle cannon and the Melta blast gun have different roles. Sometimes you're going to need to be building a long-ranged or as far-ranged as you can platform. Other times you want to get close up. Heavy bolters numerically are subpar, even though they do cover that weakness and vulnerability of people getting close to you. The autocannon and las cannon are surprisingly similar from a mathematical term. There's very little difference in one or the other. And now I wanted to get into my top 3 builds, although I cheated, there's actually 4. And the first one is a little different than I've seen anyone else suggest. This is your close support vehicle. It's your short-range Kratos. This is your Melta blast gun and 3 heavy bolters. In World War II, the infantry tank was a concept used, and it's considered a close support, so you'd like have a Matilda that would be right there with the infantry. Maybe the infantry would screen it and things like that. So it's not necessarily you are supporting the infantry or the infantry are supporting you. It's mutual support. Maybe you're preventing people from getting into base contact with you, and if they try to, you've got all that firepower from the point defense weapons. And this kind of works well with a Death Star battle plan. If you're going to make one big glob and move up to the center of the board and try to control objectives that way. This option also threatens buildings pretty well because you are having that bunker buster keyword on those Melta blast guns. There's a timing issue that I have actually raised while writing this video. If the Melta blast gun shoots at and destroys an occupied building, can the rest of your point defense weapons shoot at an infantry that may actually survive? And when they do they have the building defenses or not? So I've kind of put that one out there. And from my understanding, there might be an expected FAQ regarding Titans. While they have to declare all the targets at the same time, shooting is not simultaneous. And then in this case, point defense. And there's one other situation with bombers that's pretty similar that I've seen brought up by people. And that's that weapon timing issue that I've discussed. Moving on is the mixed bag. This is a kind of a midfield focused vehicle, and it's for all general purposes, even though I spelt that wrong. This is where you have weapons that are going to shoot all the things. I'm going to have my battle cannon and autocannon shooting this, maybe some autocannons to support that. So you got good firepower at that 16-inch range. And if they're trying to come in close to me, I do have some heavy bolters just as a deterrent. The number one build that I really think is the best is the battle cannon with triple las cannons. And while not having as much firepower on paper as the quote-unquote efficient build, I suspect that this will perform a little bit better, because at 20 inches, each individual Kratos model averages over a wound and a half against armored targets that have a save of 3+. And that's going to be most of your vehicles that you see, the tank, the general purpose tanks, things like that. If you even close into that 16 inches where you're getting to use the coaxial autocannon too, you're even increasing that more to about 1.73 is actually what it is. So since you already have 2 of these, you have a lot of firepower. So this is your ranged focused option. It is extremely threatening. There is, however, one alternative that you might consider, which is why I mentioned there were kind of 4 different options for the Kratos, and that would be replacing the hull las cannons with hull autocannons. It gives you slightly more versatility while only giving up negligible amounts of wounds and a slight amount of range. So that 4 inches can be prominent, but it lets you impact the battle and respond in whatever way is necessary. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a wonderful day.